What's up, everybody? Welcome back to A People's Historian. Each episode we read about 30 minutes of history together. We're reading chapter 13 out of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. My name is Jason Kishinev. And I'd like to ask you, are you guys enjoying the new title screen credits and the new opening music, the intro, as it were, in your fancy young kids talk? If you are, put it in the comments. If you hate it, put it in the comments. I'd like to thank my friend Tom Olchak for kind of pushing me towards VSDC video editor, which has allowed that to be possible because I've had some technical difficulties with the editor I was using before, and I won't mention that. So, chapter 13, The Socialist Challenge of A People's History. Let's dig in. The IWW, or Wobblies as they came to be called for reasons not really clear, aimed at organizing all workers in any industry into one big union, undivided by sex, race, or skills. They argued against making contracts with the employer because this had so often prevented workers from striking on their own, or in sympathy with other strikers, and thus turned union people into strike breakers. Negotiations by leaders for contracts replaced continuous struggle by the rank and file, the Wobblies believed. They spoke of direct action. Direct action means industrial action directly by, for, and of the workers themselves, without the treacherous aid of labor misleaders or scheming politicians. A strike that is initiated, controlled, and settled by the workers directly affected is direct action. Direct action is industrial democracy. One IWW pamphlet said, "Shall I tell you what direct action means? The worker on the job shall tell the boss when and where he shall work, how long and for what wages and under what conditions." I can hear all of the right-wingers watching this laughing right now. Telling the boss? The IWW people were militant, courageous. Despite a reputation given them by the press, they did not believe in initiating violence, but did fight back when attacked. In McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, they led a strike of 6,000 workers in 1909 against an affiliate of the U.S. Steel Company, defied the state troopers, and battled with them. They promised to take a trooper's life for every worker killed. Wow. In one gun battle, 4 strikers and 3 troopers were killed, and managed to keep picketing the factories until the strike was won. Wow. The IWW saw beyond strikes. Strikes are mere incidents in the class war. They are tests of strength, periodic drills in the course of which the workers train themselves for concerted action. This training is most necessary to prepare the masses for the final catastrophe, the general strike which will complete the expropriation of the employers. Can't help but wonder if this final catastrophe is inching closer to us now. Everybody's talking about capitalism, it being the end of capitalism and stuff. The idea of anarcho-syndicalism was developing strongly in Spain and Italy and France at this time, that the workers would take power not by seizing the state machinery in an armed rebellion, but by bringing the economic system to a halt in a general strike, then taking it over to use for the good of all. IWW organizer Joseph Ettor said, "If the workers of the world want to win, all they have to do is recognize their own solidarity. They have nothing to do but fold their arms and the world will stop. The workers are more powerful with their hands in their pockets than all the property of the capitalists." It's funny because I just saw that quotation credited with a different IWW person So that was Joseph Ettor, not what was his name? Haywood, big Bill Haywood. Anyway, it was an immensely powerful idea. In the 10 exciting years after its birth, the IWW became a threat to the capitalist class, exactly when capitalist growth was enormous and profits huge. The IWW never had more than 5,000 to 10,000 enrolled members at any one time. People came and went, and perhaps 100,000 were members at one time or another. But their energy, their persistence, their inspiration to others, their ability to mobilize thousands at one place, one time, made them an influence on the country far beyond their numbers. They traveled everywhere. Many were unemployed or migrant workers. They organized, wrote, spoke, sang, spread their message and their spirit. They were attacked with all the weapons the system could put together. The newspapers, the courts, the police, the army, mob violence. Local authorities passed laws to stop them from speaking. The IWW defied these laws. In Missoula, Montana, a lumber and mining area, hundreds of Wobblies arrived by boxcar after some had been prevented from speaking. They were arrested one after another until they clogged the jails and the courts, and finally forced the town to repeal its anti-speech ordinance. In Spokane, Washington, in 1909, an ordinance was passed to stop street meetings, and an IWW organizer who insisted on speaking was arrested. Thousands of Wobblies marched into the center of town to speak. One by one they spoke and were arrested until 600 were in jail. Jail conditions were brutal, and several men died in their cells, but the IWW won the right to speak. In Fresno, California in 1911, there was another free speech fight. The San Francisco Call commented, "It is one of those strange situations which crop up suddenly and are hard to understand. Some thousands of men whose business it is to work with their hands, tramping and stealing rides, suffering hardships and facing dangers, to get into jail. In jail they sang. They shouted. They made speeches through the bars to groups that gathered outside the prison. As Joyce Kornbluh reports in her remarkable collection of IWW documents, Rebel Voices, they took turns lecturing about the class struggle and leading the singing of Wobbly songs. Once they refused to stop, the jailers sent for fire department trucks and ordered the fire hoses turned full force on the prisoners. The men used their mattresses as shields, and quiet was only restored when the icy water reached knee-high in the cells." Wow. These IWW Wobblies are warriors. When city officials heard that thousands more were planning to come into town, they lifted the ban on street speaking and released the prisoners in small groups. That same year in Aberdeen, Washington, once again laws against free speech, arrests, prison, and unexpectedly victory. One of the men arrested, Stumpy Payne, a carpenter, farmhand, editor of an IWW newspaper, wrote about the experience. Here they were, 18 men in the vigor of life, most of whom came long distances through snow and hostile towns by beating their way, penniless and hungry, into a place where a jail sentence was the gentlest treatment that could be expected, and where many had already been driven into the swamps and beaten nearly to death. Yet here they were, laughing with boyish glee at tragic things that to them were jokes. But what was the motive behind the actions of these men? Why were they here, in the call of brotherhood in the human race greater than any fear or discomfort? despite the efforts of the masters of life for 6,000 years to root out that call of brotherhood from our minds. In San Diego, Jack White, not that Jack White, a wobbly arrested in a free speech fight in 1912, sentenced to 6 months in the county jail on a bread and water diet, was asked if he had anything to say to the court. A stenographer recorded what he said. The prosecuting attorney, in his plea to the jury, accused me of saying on a public platform at a public meeting, "To hell with the courts. We know what justice is." He told a great truth when he lied, for if he had searched the innermost recesses of my mind, he could have found that thought, never expressed by me before, but which I express now. To hell with your courts. I know what justice is, for I have sat in your courtroom day after day and have seen members of my class pass before the so-called bar of justice. I have seen you, Judge Sloan, and others of your kind, send them to prison because they dared to infringe upon the sacred rights of property. You have become blind and deaf to the rights of man to pursue life and happiness, and you have crushed those rights so that the sacred right of property shall be preserved. Then you tell me to respect the law. I do not. I did violate the law, and I will violate every one of your laws and still come before you and say, "To hell with the courts." The prosecutor lied, but I will accept his lie as a truth and say again so that you, Judge Sloan, may not be mistaken as to my attitude. To hell with your courts. I know what justice is. This is powerful stuff. I'm enjoying this chapter. Are you? There were also beatings, tarrings, and featherings, defeats. One IWW member, John Stone, tells of being released from the jail at San Diego at midnight with another IWW man and forced into an automobile. We were taken out of the city about 20 miles where the machine stopped. A man in the rear struck me with a blackjack several times on the head and shoulders. The other man then struck me on the mouth with his fist. The men in the rear then sprang around and kicked me in the stomach. I then started to run away and heard a bullet go past me. I stopped. In the morning, I examined Joe Marco's condition and found that the back of his head had been split open. In 1916, in Everett, Washington, a boatload of wobblies was fired on by 200 armed vigilantes gathered by the sheriff, and 5 wobblies were shot to death. 31 wounded. 2 of the vigilantes were killed, 19 wounded. The following year, the year the United States entered World War I, vigilantes in Montana seized IWW organizer Frank Little, tortured him, and hanged him, leaving his body dangling from a railroad trestle. Joe Hill, an IWW organizer, wrote dozens of songs, biting, funny, class-conscious, inspiring, that appeared in IWW publications and in its Little Red Songbook. He became a legend in his time and after. His song, "The Preacher and the Slave," had a favorite IWW target, the church. Yeah, and I don't know the melody, so I'll just read it. Long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked how about something to eat, they will answer with voices so sweet, "You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die." His song "Rebel Girl" was inspired by the strike of women at the textile mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and especially by the IWW leader of that strike, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. There are women of many descriptions in this queer world, as everyone knows. Some are living in beautiful mansions and are wearing the finest of clothes. There are blue-blooded queens and princesses who have charms made of diamonds and pearl, but the only and thoroughbred lady is the rebel girl. Kind of agree with that. In November 1915, Joe Hill was accused of killing a grocer in Salt Lake City, Utah, in a robbery. There was no direct evidence presented to the court that he had committed the murder, but there were enough pieces of evidence to persuade a jury to find him guilty. The case became known throughout the world, and 10,000 letters went to the governor in protest. But with machine guns guarding the entrance to the prison, Joe Hill was executed by a firing squad. He had written Bill Haywood just before this. Bill Haywood, that's who I saw that other quote attributed to. Big Bill Haywood. But it wasn't him. He had written Bill Haywood just before this. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organize. The IWW became involved in a set of dramatic events in Lawrence, Massachusetts in the year 1912, where the American Woolen Company opened 4 mills. The workforce were immigrant families, Portuguese, French, Canadian, English, Irish, Russian, Italian, Syrian, Lithuanian, German, Polish, Belgian, who lived in crowded, flammable wooden tenements. The average wage was $8.76 a week. A woman physician in Lawrence, Dr. Elizabeth Chpt, wrote, "A considerable number of the boys and girls die within the first 2 or 3 years after beginning work. 36 out of every 100 of all the men and women who work in the mill die before or by the time they are 25 years of age." It was in January, midwinter, when pay envelopes distributed to weavers at one of the mills, Polish women, showed that their wages, already too low to feed their families, had been reduced. They stopped their looms and walked out of the mill. The next day, 5,000 workers in another mill quit work, marched to still another mill, rushed the gates, shut off the power to the looms, and called on the other workers to leave. Soon, 10,000 workers were on strike. A telegram went to Joseph Ettore. That's the person who said the quote. Sorry. You don't even care. A telegram went to Joseph Ettore, a 26-year-old Italian and IWW leader in New York, to come to Lawrence to help conduct the strike. He came. A committee of 50 was set up, representing every nationality among the workers, to make the important decisions. Less than 1,000 mill workers belonged to the IWW, but the AFL had ignored the unskilled workers, and so they turned to the IWW leadership in the strike. The IWW organized mass meetings and parades. The strikers had to supply food and fuel for 50,000 people. The entire population of Lawrence was 86,000. Soup kitchens were set up, and money began arriving from all over the country, from trade unions, IWW locals, socialist groups, individuals. The mayor called out the local militia. The governor ordered out the state police. A parade of strikers was attacked by police a few weeks after the strike began. This led to rioting all that day. In the evening, a striker, Anna Lopizzo, was shot and killed. Witnesses said a policeman did it, but the authorities arrested Joseph Ettore and another IWW organizer who had come to Lawrence, a poet named Arturo Giovannitti. Neither was at the scene of the shooting, but the charge was that Joseph Ettore and Arturo Giovannitti did incite, procure, and counsel or command the said person, whose name is not known, to commit the said murder. With Ettore, head of the strike committee, in jail, Big Bill Haywood was called in to replace him. Other IWW organizers, including Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, came into Lawrence. Now there were 22 companies of militia and 2 troops of cavalry in the city. Martial law was declared and citizens were forbidden to talk on the streets. 36 strikers were arrested, many sentenced to a year in prison. On Tuesday, January 30th, a young Syrian striker, John Ramey, was bayoneted to death. But the strikers were still out and the mills were not working. Eder said, "Bayonets cannot weave cloth." In February, the strikers began mass picketing. 7,000 to 10,000 pickets in an endless chain marching through the mill districts with white armbands, "Don't be a scab." But their food was running out and their children hungry. It was proposed by the New York Call, a socialist newspaper, that the children of strikers be sent to sympathetic families in other cities to take care of them while the strike lasted. This had been done by strikers in Europe, never in the United States, but in 3 days the Call got 400 letters offering to take children. The IWW and the Socialist Party began to organize the children's exodus, taking applications from families who wanted them, arranging medical exams for the youngsters. Man, I can't imagine sending my kids to a stranger. I mean, times are tough and you gotta strike. Yeah, I get it. And I'm not judging them. I just can't imagine sending my kids off. I mean, maybe to my mom. Maybe to my wife's mom. On February 10th, over 100 children aged 4 to 14 left Lawrence for New York City. They were greeted at Grand Central Station by 5,000 Italian socialists singing the Marseillaise and the Internationale. The following week, another 100 children came to New York and 35 to Barre, Vermont. It was becoming clear if the children were taken care of, the strikers could stay out, for their spirit was high. The city officials in Lawrence, citing a statute on child neglect, said no more children would be permitted to leave Lawrence. Oh. The silly government. Despite the city edict, a group of 40 children assembled on February 24th to go to Philadelphia. The railroad station was filled with police, and the scene that followed was described to congressmen by a member of the Women's Committee of Philadelphia. When the time approached to depart, the children arranged in a long line, 2 by 2, in orderly procession with their parents near at hand, were about to make their way to the train when the police closed in on us with their clubs, beating right and left with no thought to children, who were in the most desperate danger of being trampled to death. The mothers and their children were thus hurled into a mass and bodily dragged to a military truck, and even then clubbed, irrespective of their cries of the panic-stricken women and children. A week after that, women returning from a meeting were surrounded by police and clubbed. One pregnant woman was carried unconscious to a hospital and gave birth to a dead child. Still, the strikers held out. "They're always marching and singing," reporter Mary Heaton Vorse wrote. "The tired, gray crowds, ebbing and flowing perpetually into the mills, had waked and opened their mouths to sing." The American Woolen Company decided to give in. It offered raises to 5 to 11%. It offered raises of 5 to 11%. the strikers insisted that the largest increases go to the lowest paid, time and a quarter for overtime, and no discrimination against those who had struck. On March 14, 1912, 10,000 strikers gathered on the Lawrence Common and, with Bill Haywood presiding, voted to end the strike. Ettore and Giovannitti went on trial. Support for them had been mounting all over the country. There were parades in New York and Boston. On September 30th, 15,000 Lawrence workers struck for 24 hours to show their support for the two men. You know, it occurs to me, we're hearing about a lot of striking, and yet we don't hear about much, really major striking nowadays. I mean, there was a Marriott hotel strike, and there was the LA teachers strike. But it doesn't, it seems like I'm getting the impression that there was a lot more striking then and in much larger numbers, and maybe we should be doing that. That's all I'm saying. On September 30th, 15,000 Lawrence workers struck for 24 hours to show their support for the two men. After that, 2,000 of the most active strikers were fired. But the IWW threatened to call another strike, and they were put back. A jury found Ettore and Giovannitti not guilty, and that afternoon 10,000 people assembled in Lawrence to celebrate. I'm surprised they were found not guilty. The IWW took its slogan, "One Big Union," seriously. Women, foreigners, black workers, the lowliest and most unskilled of workers, were included when a factory or mine was organized. When the Brotherhood of Timber Workers organized in Louisiana and invited Bill Haywood to speak to them in 1912, shortly after the Lawrence victory, he expressed surprise that no Negroes were at the meeting. He was told it was against the law to have interracial meetings in Louisiana. Haywood told the convention, "You work in the same mills together. Sometimes a black man and a white man chop down the same tree together. You are meeting in convention now to discuss the conditions under which you both labor. Why not be sensible about this and call the Negroes into the convention? If it is against the law, this is one time when the law should be broken." Negroes were invited into the convention, which then voted to affiliate with the IWW. In 1900, there were 500,000 women office workers. In 1870, there had been 19,000. 30-year difference. 481,000. Women were switchboard operators, store workers, nurses. 500,000 were teachers. The teachers formed a teachers' league that fought against the automatic firing of women who became pregnant. The following rules for female teachers were posted by the school board of one town in Massachusetts. Number 1, do not get married. Number 2, do not leave town at any time without permission of the school board. Wow. Seriously? Number 3, do not keep company with men. Number 4, be home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. These are rules for teachers, adult teachers. Number 5, do not loiter downtown in ice cream stores. Number 6, do not smoke. Number 7, do not get into a carriage with any man except your father or brother. Number 8, do not dress in bright colors. Number 9, do not dye your hair. Number 10, Do not wear any dress more than 2 inches above the ankle. The conditions of women working in a Milwaukee brewery were described by Mary Jones. Mother Mary Jones. Get a little dyslexic there. Who worked there briefly in 1910. She was close to 80 at this time. Condemned to slave daily in the washroom in wet shoes and wet clothes, surrounded with foul-mouthed, brutal foremen, the poor girls work in the vile smell of sour beer, lifting cases of empty and full bottles weighing from 100 to 150 pounds. Rheumatism is one of the chronic ailments and is closely followed by consumption. The foreman even regulates the time the girls may stay in the toilet room. Many of the girls have no home nor parents and are forced to feed and clothe and shelter themselves on $3 a week. And I'm going to end the episode there. I'd like to thank you for joining me. Hopefully you'll tune in to the next episode. And if you liked what you heard, if you enjoyed the reading, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notified when I make a new video. See you next time. Thank you.